Hello everyone. In this video we will discuss concepts for Module 1 in your Zybook. This is for SNHU Class CS200. My name is Linda Gaston and I'm your instructor. During this video we will cover the following concepts: the Python interpreter, programming in Python, the Python print statement, the Python input statement, and hints to complete your Zybook Lab Activity 1.15, ASCII Art. Let's talk first about the Python interpreter so you will understand what's going on when your program runs. Programs written in high-level languages like Python or Java, or maybe you've heard of languages like C# or C++, these languages must be translated into a language that your computer can understand. This is typically machine language. Python uses an interpreter. It translates your instructions and executes them. So Python is one of the languages that uses an interpreter. Some languages use compilers. Python interprets your instructions one at a time. We don't have a separate machine language program that's running using Python like you might see in some programs that are compiled, but for now just know that an interpreter is translating and executing your instructions. This picture demonstrates how it works. So here is your Python program, and we're going to name this program hello.py. Notice the .py extension tells your computer that this is a Python program that's running, and it will initiate the Python interpreter to run it. And here we have a simple print statement that we'll talk more about later. This statement says, "Hello, Earthling," and there may be more statements that follow. These statements are executed by your interpreter and translated into instructions that your computer can understand. They'll be executed by the CPU in the normal fashion that most programs run on computers. This process is repeated for each high-level instruction. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening when you are running programs using Zybooks. Programmers write typically Python programs in a file, and then the entire file will go to the interpreter for execution instead of just executing statements one by one. When you are using Zybooks to enter your programs, you're really using an autograder. Zybooks is just an interface that interacts with the Python interpreter. So you'll enter your program in Zybooks, and you'll see more of that as you go through the week 1 material in Zybooks. So your program is actually running inside of Zybooks, and the Zybooks interface is sending your code to the Python interpreter. And that's one reason why it's so very important that you enter your instructions precisely as they need to be entered. Otherwise your programs won't run correctly within the Zybooks interface. Very important that you're precise and no typos. Case sensitive, lowercase letters are interpreted differently than uppercase letters. So it's very important that you enter your instructions carefully here. And then they'll be executed by the Python interpreter. So let's talk more about coding in Python. And we're going to learn some vocabulary words. So in most programming languages, a statement is simply a program instruction. And you'll see more of those later. Here's an example of one simple instruction where we'll print the string or this sequence of characters, hello world. This statement will cause hello world to print to your computer console. Expressions return values when they're evaluated when you're coding in Python. So here's an expression: pay equals hours worked times pay rate. This should look familiar to those of you that have worked on an hourly basis. Variables are named references to values that are stored for use by your program. So in this particular case, pay is a variable, Hours worked is a variable, and pay rate is a variable. Assignment is used to assign values to variables. And here, in addition to seeing variables in this statement, we also have assignment because we're assigning the value of hours worked times pay rate into this variable called pay. Comments are used to explain your code to humans. Most programs in the real world, or at least in professional coding, are typically not done by a single individual. They're typically done by teams. Teams will share code, work on each other's code, maintain and correct each other's code. So comments are very helpful for the next developer and sometimes even yourself to understand what you meant to do in a particular segment of code. Here's an example of a very simple program where we have variables here, assignment, and comments. So we have the variable wage that we're assigning a value of 20. And we have a comment here that we're going to create a variable called wage with the value of 20. So we remember and know what we're doing here. Then we have another variable called hours that we're assigning a value of 40. Here's the comment, create a variable hours with the value of 40. And in the same manner, we have a variable called weeks that we're assigning a value of 50. Now we have an example of more expressions. Notice an expression is a series of values, a series of code here that results in a value. So this value goes into a variable called salary, and that equals wage times hours times weeks. Here's another comment. Now we have a print statement. We're going to print this sequence of characters, we call it a string, salary is, comma, and then end with the space in between. Okay? This will print salary is on the screen. And then we're going to simply print the variable salary. Now let's talk a bit about output. The primary way to print output is to use one of the built-in functions that comes with the Python programming language. And you'll learn about many of these functions as we go through the course. Here is the built-in function print. You don't have to write this function or this coding segment. It comes for free as part of the Python language. So we can actually send a value to this function of hello world. So in this case, this function will now print hello world. By default, each time we use the print statement, it will print on a new output line. So if we wrote print hello world 5 times, we would have 5 lines. Sometimes you don't want that to happen. And in this case, we can use what you just saw in the previous slide, which is the statement print hello, comma, end, and then 2 single quotation marks. This keeps the next print's output on the same line, separated by a single space. Now let's take a look at an example of this. So, in the first code segment, we're going to print hello there, my name is, and Carl. Notice the default behavior of each print statement on a new line occurs here. In the second example, we're going to use the statement end equals single quote, single quote. This will keep our output on the same line. So we'll print hello there, we'll print the string hello there, comma, end, single quote, parentheses, and then my name is, end equals single quote, parentheses, and Carl. And notice this makes the statement print on the same line. Now remember what we just discussed. All of these statements are being interpreted by the Python interpreter. So you must be very careful about entering the parentheses where they should be entered, the single quote marks where they should be entered, spelling print correctly, lowercase print, etc. And similarly, all of the statements here. You must also be very careful about entering this pound sign before before code that you want to be a comment, or words that you want to be a comment. Otherwise, the Python interpreter will start trying to interpret these words and you'll get an error. Let's talk a bit more about printing. So programmers usually use a single print statement to print text and variable values. So here's a little example of this. So we have a little program here where we have assigned a value of 25 to the pay rate, and we've assigned a value of 40 to the hours worked. Now we have this expression, weekly pay. We're not calculating annual pay like we were in our previous example. Weekly pay equals pay rate times hours worked. Now notice the way these variable names are put together. We cannot use spaces in variable names, so we do interesting things like using underscores, or in this case, camel case, where we start out with the first word with a lowercase and each succeeding word with an uppercase, kind of like the hump of a camel. So we have weekly pay equals pay rate times hours worked. Notice we have an operator here. This star is the multiplication symbol in Python. Then we're going to print weekly pay is, and then our end statement so that we remain on the same line, and then we're going to print weekly pay. Let's show this in a little Python Anywhere demo. I like to use a free online Python interpreter that's located at www.pythonanywhere.com. It's easier to run my programs here and to see more detailed error messages than you will see in Zybooks. So I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it week 1 _1 dot py. Remember, we have to give the .py extension so that our Python interpreter will know it's running a Python file. So I'm going to create new file. Now to save time on the recording, I'm going to type ahead a little bit here. So here's our program. We have pay rate equals 25, hours worked equals 40. We have a couple of blank lines here to make our code a little more readable. Now we have our variable weekly pay equals pay rate times hours worked, and we're going to print weekly pay is space and another single quote. This comma is extremely important in the print statement to separate out the values that you're printing, and you'll get an error if you don't use the comma to do that. And then we're just simply going to print our variable weekly pay. Let's run our program and see what happens. So you can see the program loading, and it's executed just that quickly, and it's printed weekly pay is on the same line because we used the end statement here, and then we printed our variable weekly pay. And if you multiply 25 times 40, you'll see that it is equal to 1,000. Now let's say we want to make our program a little bit more interesting. Let's say we want to provide some input to our program. Input in Python can be obtained by using another built-in function called the input function. So if we have this statement, my pay rate equals input, it will read text entered by the user, and whatever the user enters, it will go into my pay rate. It'll assign the text that was entered by the user to the my pay rate variable. So the input function again is one of the many libraries that come with the Python programming language. What's interesting about this function is it causes the interpreter to wait until the user has entered some text and push the return key. That's when the value from the input statement will go into the variable. Now let's take a look at our program using the input statement. Okay, so I'm back in our program in Python Anywhere. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to comment out all of the previous statements that we had from our earlier program, so the Python interpreter will ignore them. Now, these statements will be ignored by the Python interpreter. We want to see an example of inputting information into our program. So I'm going to type ahead just to save a little time here. So we're going to use the input statement here. We're going to ask the user to enter the name of the employee, okay? Or enter their name. We'll just do a simple hello here. We'll do the enter the employee name later. So we're going to have enter your name, and we're going to put it into name. And then we're going to print hello name. Let's run this and see how it looks. So my name is Linda. I'm going to hit the enter key, and notice the program prints hello Linda. Now let's say we want to make our little payroll program at the top lines in our code here, a little more interesting and a little more realistic. We want the user to be able to enter the employee name, the pay rate, and their hours worked, and then have the program to calculate the pay dynamically based on the input that's entered, rather than having these static numbers here, because everyone's not going to make $25 an hour and everyone's not going to work 40 hours a week. So let's just get rid of our code from the little hello example instead of commenting it out. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this message. And then let's use the input statement again in a more interesting way. So now we're going to have our user to input the employee name, and we're going to put that in the variable name, and then we're going to have the user to input the pay rate. Notice we're using an interesting command here, int. Let's talk a little bit about why. To understand why we're using the int command in the program that we just started a moment ago, we need to understand input and data types. So when we enter a string like this with quotes, that's different from the actual number 225 without quotes. So 225 in a string is really a sequence of characters, 2, 2, and 5. Just like if we put single quote C-A-R single quote, that would be the word car as a string. But that is not a number. We can't do mathematics on numbers when they're in a string format. They must be in a numerical format, like an integer. 225 is the integer 225. We can do math with this number. Strings and integers are data types. When we get our values using the input function, they're by default string data types. And again, we can't use this data type to do math, but we can convert it. We can convert strings to integers using the int function. Now let's go back to our Python Anywhere demo. So you'll notice here we have pay rate equals int. We've kind of wrapped this statement, input enter employee rate, in this int command. So it's going to take whatever the user enters here and it's going to convert it to an integer, then it's going to put it into pay rate. This is a much more sophisticated structure than you've seen before, and get used to it because we're going to do a lot more of statements like this. So just think of this as a little container. Whatever's in here gets converted by this. So So similarly, the hours worked that the user will enter will be in a string format, so we need to convert it to an integer so we can do math with it. Then we'll run the statement weekly pay equals pay rate times hours worked. That's an expression again, right? Then we'll print weekly pay for the name that we got here, and then we'll print the weekly pay. So let's run this program and see how it looks. So it's asking us, this statement here, remember, these statements are being executed sequentially. So the first thing that happens here is we're going to be requested to enter the employee name. So we'll say it's me, Linda. Then it's going to ask me the next statement to enter the employee pay rate. So we'll enter 25 like we had earlier. This time, let's say the hours worked were only 30. So the weekly pay for Linda will be $750, which is 25 times 30. Now this is a much more useful program because now we can enter pay rates for different employees with different hours worked and different hourly rates. The final portion of this video will be hints on completing Zybook Lab 1.15. In the first part of the lab, you're to output a tree using asterisks. Notice in the lab, you're given the first part of the code in a program called main.py. So here's a comment to draw a tree, and it gets you started on the top part of the tree, and then you have to enter the rest of the code in Zybooks. Now here's a hint. Notice there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 asterisks in the longest line. Okay? So you want to have these stars positionally looking like this in comparison to the longest line. So here we're going to have this particular star is 1, 2, 3 over from the very start of the line. So we'll have 3 spaces and a star. This one is going to be 1, 2 spaces from the beginning of the line and then 3 stars. This one will be 1 space from the beginning of the line and then these stars. And then here's the final largest line. Now notice there is 3 final stars here that are 2 spaces over. So we would print space, space, star, star, star. And again, here's the start of your code. So let's say, so that I'm not giving you the exact answer, that I want to print a money tree that looks a lot like the tree that you're to print with stars. We'll do this in a little Python Anywhere demo. So I'm back in Python Anywhere again. I've gotten rid of the previous code. I'm going to type ahead to save time. Here's the code to print my money tree. Notice I am printing 1, 2, 3 spaces and a star, 1, 2 spaces, 3 spaces and a $sign, 1, 2 spaces and $3 signs, 1 space and $5 signs, no spaces, $6 signs, and then 2 spaces and $3 signs. That's how I'm creating this little ASCII money tree. And ASCII just means different characters used to create a picture. And then I'm going to print a blank line. This is a new statement for us. /n gives a blank line. So let's run our program and see how it looks. Here's our money tree. Can you see how this is very similar to what you need to do for your exercise? In the second part of the lab, you're to draw below the tree an output for a cat. Look at the slashes here. So think about what I said before. So you'll start out with a forward-facing slash, a backwards-facing slash. some spaces, another forward space slash backslash. Then on the next line, you're going to space over and put the O's, and on the next line, equal signs, and then I guess these are the whiskers, 3 dashes. Now there is an important hint that you're given in Zybooks, that the Python interpreter is going through interpreting all of your commands, but some characters have special meaning to the Python interpreter, and a backslash is one of them, because it's used in the new line statement /n. So if you want to print an actual backslash like you do here, you're going to have to put 2 backslashes to tell the Python interpreter I mean to use this as a backslash, not a character to set up a new line statement. So be very careful about that, or the second part of the exercise won't work. If you have questions after viewing this video, please contact me by email at l.gaston@smhu.edu, and we can schedule a virtual office appointment to go through the exercises or answer any questions you may have. Or please attend the Module 1 live online class, where I'll be online with you, discussing any questions you may have and reviewing the Module 1 content. I posted a message for Module 1 success strategies, an announcement in Brightspace that includes all of the information that you need to log into the Module 1 live online class. Thank you for your time and attention during this video. I hope it will help you to be successful in Module 1.